The rain hammered against the metal roof of Donovan's auto repair, like 1,000 impatient fingers drumming on a tin drum. It was one of those late September evenings in Fredericksburg, Texas, where the sky turned the color of bruised plums and the air smelled of wet asphalt and distant mesquite smoke. Daniel Carter wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and glanced at the clock mounted above the tool cabinet. 6:47 p.m. 13 minutes until closing time. The shop was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Most folks had already picked up their vehicles or called to reschedule their appointments because of the weather. Daniel didn't mind the silence. After 3 years of working at Donovan's, he'd learned to appreciate the peaceful moments between the constant clang of wrenches, the hiss of pneumatic tools, and Richard Donovan's perpetually irritated voice barking orders across the garage floor. Daniel was 28 years old, lean and muscular from years of physical labor, with calloused hands that told the story of every engine he'd rebuilt, every transmission he'd replaced, every stubborn bolt he'd wrestled free. His dark hair was perpetually tousled, streaked with grease no matter how many times he washed it, and his green eyes held a quiet intensity that made people trust him with their vehicles and their stories. He'd grown up in Kerrville, about 25 miles southeast of Fredericksburg, in a small house with his mother, Patricia Carter, and his younger sister, Amy Carter. His father had left when Daniel was 12, disappearing into the night after one too many losing hands at underground poker games in San Antonio. Patricia had worked double shifts as a nurse at Peterson Regional Medical Center to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Daniel had learned early that hard work and integrity were the only currencies that truly mattered. Music had been his escape during those difficult years. While other kids his age were listening to hip-hop or rock, Daniel had fallen in love with country music. Specifically, the pure, traditional sound of artists like George Strait. There was something honest about those songs, something that spoke to the struggles and triumphs of ordinary people trying to make their way in an indifferent world. He'd saved up money from mowing lawns and fixing neighbors' cars to buy every George Strait album he could find. On particularly hard nights, when bill collectors called and his mother cried quietly in her bedroom, Daniel would put on his headphones and let songs like Amarillo by Morning and The Chair transport him to a place where dignity and perseverance still meant something. The rumble of an engine outside pulled Daniel from his thoughts. He looked up to see headlights cutting through the sheets of rain, approaching the garage entrance. The vehicle, a dark blue Chevrolet Silverado, pulled up to the bay door and stopped. Daniel pressed the button to raise the overhead door, the chain mechanism grinding and clanking as the door slowly lifted. The Silverado pulled inside, water streaming off its hood and fenders. Daniel grabbed a clean rag and approached the driver's side as the door opened. A man stepped out, wearing a denim jacket and a cream-colored cowboy hat that had seen better days. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 70s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the Texas sun, and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Daniel at ease. "Evening," the man said, his voice carrying that distinctive Texas drawl that sounded like home. "Sorry to show up so close to closing time. I was heading back from a meeting in Austin, and the truck started making a noise about 10 miles back. Sounds like it's coming from under the hood." Daniel nodded, his professional instincts already engaged. "No problem at all, sir. Let me take a look. What kind of noise are we talking about?" "Sort of a grinding sound. Gets worse when I accelerate," the man explained, removing his hat and running his fingers through silver hair. "I've had this truck for 8 years and never had a lick of trouble with it until today." As the man stepped further into the light of the garage, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He recognized that face, those distinctive features that had graced album covers, concert posters, and magazine spreads for over 4 decades. Standing in his garage, looking concerned about a grinding noise, was George Strait himself. For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. He'd listened to this man's music thousands of times, had sung along to every word while working under hoods and changing oil, had drawn strength from those songs during the darkest periods of his life. And now, George Strait was standing 3 feet away, asking for help with his truck. Daniel forced himself to maintain his composure. He could tell that George appreciated being treated like a regular customer, rather than a celebrity. "Let's pop the hood and I'll see what we're dealing with," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. George pulled the hood release, and Daniel lifted the hood, propping it open with the support rod. He grabbed a work light and leaned over the engine compartment, his trained eyes scanning the belts, hoses, and pulleys. "Can you start it up for me?" he called out. George climbed back into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine fired up with a rumble, and immediately Daniel heard the grinding noise. It was coming from the serpentine belt area. He traced the sound to the alternator pulley, which was wobbling slightly on its shaft. "Found it," Daniel announced, signaling for George to cut the engine. "Your alternator bearing is failing. The pulley's got play in it, that's what's causing the grinding. If you keep driving it like this, the belt could shred and you'd lose your electrical system." George stepped out of the truck and joined Daniel at the front of the vehicle. "Can you fix it tonight?" "I've got about a 2-hour drive ahead of me to get home." Daniel checked his watch again. 6:55 p.m. He thought about the chicken pot pie waiting for him in his apartment refrigerator, about the episode of Yellowstone he'd planned to watch before bed. Then he looked at George Strait, not the icon, but the man who was stranded in a rainstorm and just wanted to get home safely. "I can have you back on the road in about an hour," Daniel said. "I've got an alternator in stock that'll fit your model. Let me grab it from the parts room." Relief washed over George's face. "I really appreciate this, son. What's your name?" "Daniel. Daniel Carter." George extended his hand and Daniel shook it, acutely aware that he was shaking hands with one of his heroes. "Pleased to meet you, Daniel. I'm George." "I know who you are, sir," Daniel said with a slight smile. "I've been listening to your music since I was 13 years old. Troubadour got me through some tough times in high school." George's expression softened. "That means more to me than you know. There's nothing better than hearing that the music connected with someone." As Daniel headed to the parts room, he felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the muggy evening air. He located the alternator he needed, a quality replacement that would last another 100,000 miles, and grabbed his socket set and belt tension tool from his workstation. He was just positioning his floor jack under the Silverado to get better access to the alternator when he heard a car door slam outside, followed by quick footsteps. Daniel's stomach tightened. He recognized those footsteps. Richard Donovan burst through the side entrance, shaking water from his expensive leather jacket. He was a stocky man in his late 50s, with thinning hair that he combed over in an elaborate arrangement, a permanent scowl etched into his fleshy face, and small eyes that always seemed to be calculating profit margins. He wore tailored slacks and Italian leather shoes that had no business being in an auto repair shop, and he carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd spent his life steamrolling over anyone who got in his way. Richard had inherited the shop from his father, Walter Donovan, a respected mechanic who'd built the business on honesty and quality work. But where Walter had been beloved in the community, Richard was tolerated at best. He'd expanded the business aggressively, opened 2 more locations in nearby towns, and prioritized profit over everything else. He nickel and dimed customers with unnecessary repairs, paid his mechanics as little as possible, and had a particular disdain for anything he considered beneath his social status, which included most of the working-class culture of rural Texas. "What the hell are you still doing here, Carter?" Richard snapped, not even acknowledging George's presence yet. I saw the lights on from the street. Closing time was, he checked his gold Rolex, 3 minutes ago. I've got a customer with a failed alternator, Daniel replied calmly, years of practice keeping his voice neutral in the face of Richard's perpetual hostility. I'm getting him back on the road. Should be done in about an hour. Richard's eyes finally landed on George, who was standing near the workbench, his cowboy hat back on his head. For a moment, Richard's expression flickered with recognition, then hardened into something between contempt and smug satisfaction. "Well, well," Richard said, a sneer creeping into his voice. "If it isn't the king of country himself, what brings royalty to my humble establishment?" George's demeanor remained polite, but guarded. "Just truck trouble. Your mechanic here was kind enough to help me out." "Was he now?" Richard turned his attention back to Daniel, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess, Carter. You're planning to fix this on overtime that I'll have to pay you for, right? Always looking for an angle to squeeze more money out of this place." Daniel felt heat rising in his face, but he kept his voice level. "I wasn't planning to clock overtime for this, Richard. I'm just helping a customer who needs to get home." "Oh, how noble," Richard said, his voice rising. "Saint Daniel, working for free to help out the common people." He gestured mockingly at George. "Except this ain't common people, is it? This is George Strait, Mr. Country Music himself. You starstruck, Carter? You think fixing his truck is going to get you backstage passes or something?" "Richard, that's not—" Daniel began, but Richard cut him off. "You know what I can't stand?" Richard continued, his face reddening. "This whole cowboy culture nonsense. Trucks and boots and belt buckles and whiny songs about beer and heartbreak. It's embarrassing. This is the 21st century, and we've got grown men walking around in costume pretending they're living in some romanticized past that never actually existed." An uncomfortable silence filled the garage. The rain continued to pound on the roof, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. George's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. Richard walked closer to Daniel, invading his personal space. "You're always playing that country garbage on the radio in here. I've told you 100 times I can't stand it. But you keep doing it anyway. No respect for authority. No respect for the fact that I sign your paychecks." "I turn it off when you're here," Daniel said quietly. "You've never been here in the evenings when I play it." "Well, I'm here now, aren't I?" Richard shot back. He turned to George. "No offense to you personally, Mr. Strait. I'm sure you're a fine businessman. I heard you've made quite a fortune off this country music thing. Good for you, exploiting the nostalgia of people who can't let go of the past. But in my shop, we focus on work, not entertainment. And we certainly don't stay open past closing time to fawn over celebrities." "I didn't ask for special treatment," George said, his voice quiet but firm. "I just needed a mechanical issue fixed. Daniel here was professional and helpful. I don't see what the problem is." "The problem," Richard said, wheeling on Daniel again, "is that this employee has a history of poor judgment and insubordination. The problem is that he thinks he can run this shop however he wants, regardless of my policies. The problem is that I'm tired of his attitude." Daniel's heart began to pound. He'd seen Richard fire people before, good mechanics who'd made minor mistakes or questioned his overcharging practices. Richard enjoyed the power of it, the way people's faces fell when they realized their livelihoods were disappearing. "I've been here for 3 years," Daniel said, fighting to keep his voice from shaking. "I show up on time every day. I do quality work. Customers ask for me by name. What exactly is my poor judgment?" "Your poor judgment," Richard said, stepping so close that Daniel could smell the whiskey on his breath, "is thinking that you're important. thinking that you can make decisions about when we're open and who we serve without consulting me. This is my business, Carter. Mine, not yours." He turned and pointed at George. "I don't care if that's George Strait, the President of the United States, or Jesus Christ himself. When the clock says 7 p.m., we're closed. You don't get to decide otherwise." "Then I'll do it off the clock," Daniel said. "Like I already told you." "No, you won't," Richard snapped. "Because you're fired. Clean out your locker and get out of my shop." The words hung in the air like the storm clouds outside. Daniel felt the floor shift beneath his feet. Fired. After 3 years of loyal service, of arriving early and staying late, of building a reputation as the best mechanic in the shop, he was being fired for trying to help someone. "You can't be serious," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Richard's face was flushed with anger and something else, a kind of gleeful malice that came from exercising power over someone who couldn't fight back. "You've been a pain in my ass since the day I hired you. Always questioning my pricing, always taking the customer's side when they complain about charges, always acting like you know better than me how to run this business. Well, guess what? You're done. You're unemployed. How's that for knowing better?" George stepped forward. "Now hold on a minute. This is completely unreasonable. The man was just trying to help me. If anyone should be angry, it should be me, and I'm not." I appreciated his willingness to stay late. "With all due respect, Mr. Strait," Richard said, not sounding respectful at all, "this is none of your concern. This is between me and my former employee." Daniel looked at George and saw genuine concern in the older man's eyes. "It's okay," Daniel said quietly. He turned to Richard. "I'll clean out my locker." "You're damn right you will," Richard said. "And leave your shop keys on the desk. I'll mail you your final paycheck. Now get out." Daniel walked to his locker in the back corner of the shop, his legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. 3 years. Gone in an instant. He opened the locker and pulled out his personal items. A spare set of clothes, his lunch container, a framed photograph of his mother and sister, and a small portable speaker he used to play music while he worked. Everything fit in a worn backpack that had seen him through community college. When he returned to the main area, George was still standing there, looking troubled. Richard had positioned himself near the entrance, arms crossed, waiting to ensure Daniel actually left. Daniel set his keys on the desk and walked toward the door. As he passed George, the singer reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry this happened," George said quietly. "This isn't right." "It's okay, sir," Daniel replied, though nothing felt okay at all. "Sometimes things just don't work out. I hope you get your truck fixed and make it home safely." "Wait," George said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into Daniel's hand. "Call me tomorrow. Please." Daniel looked down at the card. Simple, elegant, with just a name, phone number, and email address. He nodded, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out into the rain. The downpour soaked him instantly, plastering his hair to his forehead and running down his face like tears. He walked to his 15-year-old Honda Civic, parked at the far end of the lot, climbed inside, and sat there for a long moment, watching the rain cascade down the windshield. He'd been fired. The rent was due in 12 days. He had maybe $800 in his checking account. The job market for mechanics in Fredericksburg wasn't exactly booming. And all of it had happened because he'd tried to do the right thing. Daniel started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, his headlights barely cutting through the storm. As he drove through the darkened streets toward his small apartment on the east side of town, he couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head. Richard's cruel satisfaction, George's shocked concern, The casual cruelty of being dismissed like he was nothing. When he finally reached his apartment, a one-bedroom unit in a complex that had seen better decades, he sat in his car for another 10 minutes, gathering the strength to go inside and face the reality of his situation. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, and the streets were empty and dark. His phone buzzed. A text from Kevin Hayes, his best friend and fellow mechanic who worked at a shop across town. "Dude, I just heard from Linda what happened at Donovan's. Are you okay? Call me." News traveled fast in a small town. Daniel texted back, "I'm fine. Talk tomorrow." He wasn't fine, but he would be. He had to be. His mother had raised him to be resilient, to find dignity in hardship, to keep moving forward even when the road ahead was dark and uncertain. Daniel grabbed his backpack, locked his car, and trudged up the exterior stairs to his second-floor apartment. Tomorrow he would start looking for a new job. Tomorrow he would figure out how to pay his bills. Tomorrow he would deal with the aftermath of tonight's disaster. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. He dropped his backpack on the couch, walked to his small kitchen, and stood at the sink, looking out the window at the rain-soaked parking lot below. Somewhere out there, George Strait was probably getting his truck fixed by some emergency mechanic Richard had called, paying triple the normal rate for after-hours service. And Richard Donovan was probably at home, proud of himself for putting an uppity employee in his place. The injustice of it burned in Daniel's chest. But beneath the anger and hurt, there was something else. A stubborn determination that had carried him through every other hardship in his life. He'd survived his father's abandonment, his family's financial struggles, the grind of working full-time while putting himself through technical school. He would survive this too. Daniel pulled George's business card from his pocket and set it on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow, after he'd had time to process everything, maybe he would call. Or maybe he wouldn't. He wasn't sure what good it would do. George Strait was a kind man who'd witnessed an injustice, but he couldn't fix Daniel's life. As Daniel finally changed out of his wet clothes and collapsed onto his bed, exhausted and emotionally drained, he had no idea that his act of kindness that rainy evening would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life, but the entire landscape of Fredericksburg. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, preparing the ground for whatever would come next. Daniel woke to sunlight streaming through the gap in his bedroom curtains and the harsh blare of his alarm clock. For a moment, still caught in the fog between sleep and waking, everything felt normal. Then reality crashed over him like a cold wave. He was unemployed. He sat up in bed, running his hands through his hair, and checked his phone. 7:15 a.m. On a normal Friday, he would already be at the shop, preparing for the day's scheduled repairs. Instead, he was facing an empty calendar and a growing sense of dread about his financial situation. There were several text messages waiting. One from his sister, Amy. "Mom told me what happened. I'm so sorry, Danny. Let me know if you need anything." One from Kevin. "Seriously, call me when you wake up. I might have a lead on something." And 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. Daniel called Kevin first. His friend answered on the second ring. "Man, I can't believe Donovan actually fired you," Kevin said without preamble. "Everyone knows you're the best mechanic he had. The guy's an absolute idiot." "Yeah, well, idiots with business licenses get to make hiring and firing decisions," Daniel replied, walking to his kitchen to start coffee. "What's this lead you mentioned?" Jake Morrison over at Morrison's Automotive said he might be looking for another mechanic in a month or two. Business has been picking up. I told him about your situation, and he said to give him a call. It's not a sure thing, but it's something. "A month or two," Daniel repeated, feeling the weight of those words. "Kevin, my rent's due in less than 2 weeks. I've got maybe enough savings to cover 1 month, and that's if I don't eat or pay utilities. I know, man, I know. Look, if you need a loan to get through— No, Daniel said firmly. Kevin had his own family to support, a wife and 2 young kids. I appreciate it, but I'll figure something out. I always do. After he hung up with Kevin, Daniel poured himself coffee and stood at his kitchen counter, staring at George Strait's business card. The 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number nagged at him. He dialed his voicemail. The first message was from 8:47 p.m. the previous night. Daniel, this is George Strait. I wanted to check that you made it home okay, and to say again how sorry I am about what happened. Please give me a call when you get a chance. The second was from 10:23 p.m. Daniel, it's George again. I've been thinking about the situation and I'd really like to talk to you. Call anytime, doesn't matter how late. The third was from 7:02 a.m. Daniel, I'm heading back to the area this morning. I'd like to buy you breakfast and talk. There's a cafe called Peachtree Restaurant on Main Street. I'll be there at 9 a.m. if you can make it. I hope you'll come. Daniel glanced at the clock. 7:34 a.m. He had time to shower and make it to downtown Fredericksburg by 9. Part of him wondered what there was to talk about. What was done was done. But another part, the part that had been raised to respect his elders and honor his commitments, felt like he owed it to George to at least show up. He showered quickly, dressed in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, and drove into town. Fredericksburg's Main Street was already bustling with early morning activity. Tourists browsing the antique shops, locals grabbing breakfast before work. The steady rhythm of a small town coming to life. Daniel found parking near the Peachtree Restaurant and walked inside. The cafe was a local institution, with mismatched vintage tables, walls covered in old photographs of Fredericksburg's history, and the smell of bacon and fresh-baked biscuits filling the air. George was already there, sitting in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee already on the table. Daniel, George said, standing to shake his hand. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Honestly, sir, I wasn't sure either, Daniel admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. But you asked, and that means something. They ordered breakfast, chicken fried steak and eggs for George, a simple omelet for Daniel, and for a few minutes, they made small talk about the weather clearing up, about the history of Fredericksburg's German heritage, about anything except the elephant in the room. Finally, George set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what happened at that shop, about how you lost your job because you were trying to help me. That wasn't your fault, Daniel said. Richard Donovan's been looking for a reason to fire me for a while. I just gave him one. Maybe, George said, but the fact remains that a good man suffered consequences for doing the right thing. That doesn't sit well with me. Daniel appreciated the sentiment, but he wasn't sure where this was going. I'll find another job. I'm a good mechanic. Someone will hire me. I'm sure they will, George agreed, but I'd like to help make that happen sooner rather than later. I made some calls this morning. I know the owner of Hill Country Motors in Kerrville, Robert Jensen. Good man, runs a solid operation. He's willing to interview you today if you're interested. I didn't promise anything on your behalf, but I vouched for your character and your work ethic based on what I saw last night. Daniel sat back, stunned. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. George paused, his expression serious. Can I tell you something? I've been in the music business for over 40 years. I've met thousands of people, famous, powerful, wealthy people. And you know what I've learned? Character reveals itself in small moments. The way you treated me last night, not like a celebrity, but like a customer who needed help. The way you handled yourself with dignity when Donovan was tearing into you. The way you didn't ask me for anything. didn't try to leverage the situation. That told me everything I needed to know about who you are." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I was just doing my job." "No," George corrected gently. "You were being a good person. There's a difference." The waitress brought their food, and they ate, while George asked Daniel about his background, his family, his dreams beyond being a mechanic. Daniel found himself opening up in a way he rarely did, telling George about his mother's sacrifices, about putting himself through technical school, about his hope to someday open his own shop where he could treat customers fairly and employees with respect. "That's a good dream," George said. "Hold on to it. And in the meantime, call Robert Jensen. Even if nothing comes of it, at least you'll have tried." Before they parted ways in the parking lot, George pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is a check for $2,000. Before you refuse, listen to me. Consider it payment for the work you were willing to do on my truck last night, plus a little extra to help you get through until you land on your feet. I don't want you worrying about rent when you should be focused on moving forward." Daniel stared at the envelope, his pride warring with his practical need. "George, I can't." "You can, and you will," George said firmly. "Let me do this. It would be an honor to help someone who helped me." Reluctantly, Daniel accepted the envelope. "I'll pay you back. Only if you want to, and only when you're solidly back on your feet," George said. "No pressure, no timeline. Just know that I believe in you, Daniel Carter. I think you're going places." They shook hands again, and Daniel watched as George climbed into his Silverado, apparently fixed by some other mechanic the night before, and drove away. Daniel stood in the parking lot holding the envelope, feeling like he'd stepped into some alternate reality where kindness was rewarded instead of punished. He called Robert Jensen from his car and scheduled an interview for 2 p.m. that afternoon. Then he drove home to change into more professional attire and prepare. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Donovan was having a very different kind of morning. He'd arrived at his shop at 8:30 a.m., feeling satisfied with himself. Firing Daniel Carter had been overdue, and he didn't regret it for a second. The kid had always been too idealistic, too concerned with doing the right thing instead of maximizing profit. Good riddance. Richard parked his BMW in his reserved spot near the entrance and walked toward the shop's front office. That's when he noticed the vehicles. 4 black Cadillac Escalades were parked in a line along the street in front of his shop, blocking the entrance. They were pristine, gleaming in the morning sunlight, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. Richard felt a flutter of unease in his stomach. As he approached the front door, 2 men in dark suits stepped out of the lead vehicle. They were both tall, professional-looking, with earpieces and the kind of bearing that suggested security or law enforcement. "Richard Donovan?" one of them asked. "Who's asking?" Richard replied, trying to sound authoritative but hearing the tremor in his own voice. "We're with Jennings Security Services," the man said, showing a badge. "We work for George Strait. He'd like to have a word with you." The rear door of the second Escalade opened, and George stepped out, looking considerably less friendly than he had the previous evening. He walked toward Richard with measured steps, his expression serious. "Mr. Donovan," George said evenly, "we need to talk." "I'm busy," Richard said, though he made no move toward his door. "I've got a business to run." "This won't take long," George replied, "but it's important. Can we step inside?" Reluctantly, Richard unlocked the front office and led George inside. The security personnel remained outside, but Richard could see them through the windows, standing in formation like sentries. Other people on the street were stopping to stare at the spectacle. Once inside, George didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What you did last night was wrong. With all due respect, Mr. Strait, how I run my business and who I employ is my concern, not yours. "Normally I'd agree with you," George said. "But you fired a good man for the sole reason that he was trying to help me. You humiliated him in front of me. And from what I've learned this morning from asking around town, that's par for the course for you." Richard's face reddened. "You've been asking around about me?" "I have. I called some friends who live in this area. Turns out you have quite a reputation, Mr. Donovan. Overcharging customers, pushing unnecessary repairs, high employee turnover because you treat your mechanics like dirt. Your father built this business on integrity, and you've been steadily destroying that legacy. How dare you?" "I'm not finished," George said, his voice taking on a steel edge that suggested he wasn't a man to be trifled with. "I'm not here to ruin you or shut you down. I'm here to make you an offer. Rehire Daniel Carter with a raise, apologize to him publicly for what you did, and commit to treating your employees and customers better going forward." Richard laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Or what? You'll write a mean song about me? I already told you, I don't care about country music or country culture. You have no power over me." "Don't I?" George pulled out his phone and showed Richard the screen. It was a social media post with over 2 million views, posted at 11 p.m. the night before. George Strait. "Tonight, I was stranded with truck trouble in Fredericksburg, TX. A mechanic named Daniel Carter went above and beyond to help me, staying late to get me back on the road. When his boss showed up, the boss fired him on the spot for helping me. I believe in supporting good people who do right by others. If anyone in the Texas Hill Country is looking for an honest, skilled mechanic with strong character, I can't recommend Daniel Carter highly enough. Do the right thing, talk Texas proud." Richard's stomach dropped. 2 million views. The post had thousands of comments, and he could see that most of them were condemning him, even though George hadn't mentioned him by name. "Now," George continued, "I could post a follow-up mentioning your shop by name. I could tell my fans, and I have quite a few of them in Texas, about how you operate your business. Or you could do the right thing, make this situation right, and we can all move forward." Richard's mind raced. 2 million views. The potential damage to his reputation, his business, his other locations. But his pride, his need to maintain control, pushed back hard. "Get out of my shop," Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. "You come in here with your muscle and your threats, trying to intimidate me? I'm not rehiring anybody. Daniel Carter is done, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now get out before I call the police." George studied him for a long moment, something like disappointment flickering across his face. "I gave you a chance to do the right thing, Mr. Donovan. What happens next is on you." He walked out, climbed back into his Escalade, and the convoy of black SUVs pulled away, leaving Richard standing in his office, shaking with anger and adrenaline. Within an hour, George posted a follow-up on social media. On George Strait. Update on my previous post. I spoke with the owner of Donovan's Auto Repair in Fredericksburg this morning, hoping to resolve the situation. I gave him the opportunity to make things right. He refused and asked me to leave. I believe the public has a right to know how businesses treat people who try to do good. I'll continue to support Daniel Carter and hope he lands somewhere that appreciates his integrity. Stand up for what's right. By noon, the story had been picked up by local news outlets. By 2 p.m., when Daniel was sitting in Robert Jensen's office at Hill Country Motors, national country music websites were running articles. By 5 p.m., Richard Donovan's phone was ringing off the hook with angry calls, and his online reviews were being bombarded with one-star ratings. Daniel, meanwhile, was shaking Robert Jensen's hand, having just been offered a job with better pay, better hours, and a boss who actually seemed to value his employees. "When can you start?" Robert asked. "Monday morning," Daniel replied, barely able to believe his luck was turning around so quickly. As he drove home that evening, Daniel's phone buzzed with notifications. He pulled over to check and discovered George's social media posts. His hands started shaking as he read through the comments. Thousands of people offering support, sharing the posts, condemning Richard Donovan's behavior. He called George. The singer answered on the first ring. "I saw your posts," Daniel said. "George, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," George interrupted. "Sometimes good people need someone to stand up for them. I'm just glad I was in a position to do it." "I got the job at Hill Country Motors," Daniel said. "I start Monday." "That's wonderful news. Robert's a good man. You'll do well there." "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For believing in me. For your help. For the check. For all of it." "You're welcome," George said warmly. "But Daniel, remember this. You earned all of this by being who you are. I just helped shine a light on it. Keep being that person, and good things will keep coming your way." After they hung up, Daniel sat in his car, watching the sun set over the Texas hills, feeling like he'd lived through a lifetime in the past 24 hours. He'd lost a job, gained a new one, met one of his heroes, and learned that sometimes, against all odds, kindness really did matter. He didn't know it yet, but the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls, text messages, and surreal moments of recognition. Daniel's story had spread far beyond George Strait's social media posts. By Saturday morning, major news outlets were running features about the mechanic who got fired for helping a country music legend. Camera crews from San Antonio and Austin showed up at his apartment complex, forcing him to give impromptu interviews in the parking lot, while neighbors watched with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. "I was just doing my job," Daniel kept repeating to reporters, uncomfortable with the attention. Anyone would have done the same thing. But that wasn't true, and everyone knew it. The story had struck a nerve because it represented something people desperately wanted to believe in. That doing the right thing still mattered. That good people could still come out ahead. That integrity wasn't just a quaint concept from a bygone era. Linda Torres, the receptionist from Donovan's Auto Repair, called Daniel on Saturday afternoon. She was a single mother in her 40s who'd worked for the shop for 7 years, enduring Richard's tantrums because she needed the health insurance for her diabetic son. "Daniel, I had to call you," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "The shop has been chaos since Friday. The phones won't stop ringing. Mostly people calling to yell at Richard. We've had protesters outside with signs that say, 'Support Daniel Carter' and 'Donovan's,' where good deeds get punished. Richard's losing his mind. I never wanted this to become a circus," Daniel said honestly. "I just wanted to fix a truck." "I know you didn't. But I'll tell you something. It's been cathartic watching Richard finally face consequences for how he treats people. He's screamed at me 100 times over the years. He's made Carlos Rodriguez cry more than once." Carlos was another mechanic at the shop, a quiet man in his 50s who'd immigrated from Mexico 20 years earlier. Seeing him scramble for once instead of always being the one in control, there's some justice in that. By Sunday, Richard had hired a crisis management consultant from Austin, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Walsh, who specialized in rehabilitating damaged reputations. She'd arranged for Richard to give a statement to the local press that afternoon outside the shop. Daniel watched the live stream on his phone. Richard stood at a podium that had been hastily set up, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was slightly too tight. Victoria stood just off camera, probably feeding him lines through an earpiece. "I want to address the recent incident involving former employee Daniel Carter," Richard read from a prepared statement, his voice stiff and mechanical. "While I stand by my right as a business owner to make personnel decisions as I see fit, I recognize that the circumstances may have appeared harsh. I want to assure the community that Donovan's Auto Repair remains committed to quality service and customer satisfaction. We've been a part of this community for 35 years, and we plan to continue serving Fredericksburg for decades to come." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no offer to rehire Daniel. Just corporate doublespeak designed to minimize damage while admitting nothing. The reporters didn't let him off easy. "Mr. Donovan, do you regret firing Daniel Carter?" "I regret how the situation has been portrayed," Richard replied, deflecting. "Will you be offering Daniel his job back?" "Mr. Carter has moved on to other employment. We wish him well. Do you have a response to the hundreds of people who've pledged to boycott your business? We value all of our customers and hope they'll continue to give us the opportunity to serve them." Daniel turned off the live stream, feeling oddly hollow. He'd never wanted an apology from Richard, knew he'd never get a sincere one anyway. But watching the man refuse to take any real responsibility still stung. His phone rang. Kevin Hayes. "Did you watch that farce?" Kevin asked. "Unfortunately, yes. The guy's unbelievable. You know what the talk is around town? People are organizing. There's a group that wants to stand outside his shop every Saturday with signs. Some folks are talking about filing complaints with the Better Business Bureau about his shady billing practices. This has opened up a whole can of worms he wasn't expecting." Daniel felt uncomfortable with the idea of prolonged conflict. "I just want to move on, Kevin. I start my new job tomorrow. That's what I need to focus on." "I hear you, man. But this is bigger than just you now. People are tired of guys like Donovan treating workers like garbage. You've become a symbol of something." After hanging up, Daniel took a long walk through his neighborhood, trying to clear his head. The evening air was cool and pleasant, carrying the smell of mesquite smoke from someone's grill. Normal life continuing all around him, while his own life felt like it had been picked up by a tornado and set down in unfamiliar territory. When he returned to his apartment, he found Amy sitting on his doorstep. "Hey, big brother," she said, standing up to hug him. "Thought you could use some company." Amy was 24, working as a fourth-grade teacher in Kerrville. She had their mother's warm smile and practical nature, tempered with a fierce loyalty to family that made her drive 45 minutes on a Sunday evening just to check on her brother. "How are you really doing?" she asked once they were inside, settling onto his worn couch with beers from his refrigerator. "Honestly, I don't know," Daniel admitted. 3 days ago, I had a quiet life. I went to work, came home, maybe grabbed drinks with Kevin on Fridays. Now I've got reporters calling me, strangers recognizing me at the grocery store, and George Strait's people checking in to make sure I'm okay. It's overwhelming. But good overwhelming. You got a better job out of it. Yeah, the job is great. Robert Jensen seems like exactly the kind of boss I've always wanted to work for. But all this attention... He gestured vaguely at his phone, which kept buzzing with notifications. "It makes me uncomfortable. I'm not a hero. I'm just a mechanic who tried to help someone." Amy squeezed his shoulder. "You're a good person who got treated badly and then got lifted up by someone who recognized your worth. There's nothing wrong with accepting that. Let people celebrate it. God knows there's enough bad news in the world. Let them have this one feel-good story." They spent the rest of the evening talking about normal things, their mother's upcoming birthday, Amy's struggles with a particularly difficult student, the latest gossip from their hometown. It was exactly what Daniel needed, a reminder that beneath all the chaos, he was still just himself. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Daniel arrived at Hill Country Motors 15 minutes early, dressed in clean work clothes with his name stitched over the pocket. The shop was larger than Donovan's, with 8 bays instead of 4, and a waiting area that was actually clean and welcoming. Robert Jensen met him at the entrance, a man in his early 60s with gray hair, kind eyes, and a firm handshake. "Welcome aboard, Daniel. Let me show you around and introduce you to the crew." There were 5 other mechanics, all of whom greeted Daniel warmly. Tommy Bradford was a heavyset man in his 30s who specialized in diesel engines. Peter Chen was in his late 20s, focused on electrical systems and diagnostics. James Sullivan was the senior mechanic, approaching retirement age with 40 years of experience and a gentle teaching manner. Miguel Ortega was fresh out of technical school, eager and enthusiastic. And Frank Morrison, Jake's father, who Kevin had mentioned, a quiet man who'd been working on cars since the 1980s. "We heard about what happened with Donovan," James said during the morning break. "That guy's always been a piece of work. My cousin worked for him back in 2018, lasted 6 months before Richard's screaming drove him to quit." "Well, you won't find that here," Robert said, overhearing. "We run a respectful shop. We do honest work for fair prices. We treat customers right. And we treat each other right. That's the whole philosophy." Daniel's first assignment was a transmission replacement on a Ford F-250, exactly the kind of challenging but straightforward work he enjoyed. As he lost himself in the familiar rhythm of removing bolts, draining fluid, and carefully extracting the old transmission, he felt some of the tension of the past few days finally start to ease. During lunch, the crew gathered in the break room, and the conversation inevitably turned to Daniel's newfound fame. "My daughter sent me the video of you on the news," Tommy said, pulling out his phone. "You handled those reporters like a pro." "I felt like a deer in headlights," Daniel admitted. "You didn't look it. You came across as humble and genuine. That's why people are connecting with your story." Peter leaned forward. "Is it true that George Strait's people have been checking in on you?" "His management called a couple times, yeah. Just making sure I was okay, asking if I needed anything. It's been surreal." "Man, I've been a George Strait fan my whole life," Frank said quietly. "The fact that he went to bat for you like that, put his reputation on the line to call out Donovan, that says everything about both of you." The week progressed smoothly. Daniel fell into the routine of his new job, appreciating the stark difference between Robert's leadership style and Richard's. When a customer complained about a diagnostic fee, Robert sat down with them, explained the work that had gone into identifying the problem, and offered a detailed breakdown of the charges. When Miguel made a mistake installing brake pads, Robert patiently showed him the correct procedure, instead of screaming. When the shop got backed up on Thursday afternoon, Robert rolled up his sleeves and helped on the floor, instead of hiding in his office. This, Daniel thought, was what a real professional operated like. Meanwhile, the situation at Donovan's Auto Repair continued to deteriorate. The boycott that had started as angry social media posts was becoming a real economic problem. Regular customers were taking their business elsewhere, many of them specifically requesting Daniel at his new shop. The Saturday protesters had shown up as promised, a group of about 20 people with homemade signs, peacefully demonstrating outside Richard's location. Richard responded by posting angry rants on his personal Facebook page about cancel culture and mob mentality, which only made things worse. Victoria Walsh, his crisis consultant, apparently quit after Richard ignored her advice to stay off social media and issue a genuine apology. By the end of Daniel's first week at Hill Country Motors, 3 of the mechanics still working for Richard had put in their 2-week notices. Linda Torres had quietly started looking for receptionist positions at other businesses. And Carlos Rodriguez, who'd endured Richard's abuse for 8 years, had finally reached his breaking point and walked out mid-shift after Richard screamed at him for taking too long on a brake job. Kevin called Daniel on Friday evening with an update. Carlos came by my shop this afternoon, asking if we're hiring. I had to tell him we're fully staffed, but I gave him Robert Jensen's number. Hope that's okay. Of course, Daniel said. Carlos is a good guy. He deserves better than what Richard put him through. That's 3 of Richard's mechanics gone in 1 week. The man's imploding his own business. Daniel felt a complicated mix of emotions. He didn't take pleasure in Richard's struggles. He wasn't built that way. But he couldn't deny a sense of justice being served. Actions had consequences, and Richard was finally facing his. On Saturday morning, Daniel was working in his bay when Robert appeared with a surprise visitor. George Strait, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, looking like any other customer. George wanted to stop by and see how you're settling in, Robert said with a grin. I'll give you some privacy. You didn't have to drive all the way here, Daniel said, wiping his hands on a rag. I was in the area, George said, though Daniel suspected that wasn't entirely true. I wanted to see you in person, make sure you're doing okay with everything that's happened. They walked out to the parking lot, leaning against George's Silverado, which Daniel noticed with a smile was running perfectly now. I'm doing good, Daniel said. Really good, actually. This job is everything I hoped it would be. Robert's a great boss. The crew is solid, and I feel valued here. That's a huge change. I'm glad to hear it. George was quiet for a moment, watching traffic pass on the highway. I've been thinking about what happened, about how one small act of kindness snowballed into all of this. You know what I realized? Moments like what happened in that garage, they're tests. They reveal who people really are. You passed your test. Donovan failed his. He's really struggling now, Daniel said. Part of me feels bad about that. Don't, George said firmly. You didn't cause his problems. His own behavior did. The way he treated you, the way he's apparently treated dozens of employees and customers over the years, that was always going to catch up with him eventually. What happened with us just accelerated the timeline. A truck pulled into the parking lot, and a middle-aged couple got out. The woman's eyes widened when she recognized George. Oh my goodness, she said, approaching carefully. Mr. Strait, I'm such a huge fan. Would you mind if we got a picture? Not at all, George said graciously, posing for a quick photo with the couple. After they went inside, gushing with excitement, he turned back to Daniel. That happens about 100 times a day, but I never mind. Those folks are why I get to do what I love. You handle it with a lot of grace, Daniel observed. I try. But here's the thing. Fame is weird. It can open doors, give you a platform to help people, like I was able to help you. But it can also make you forget what really matters. That's why moments like meeting you are important to me. They remind me that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to do right by each other. Before George left, he handed Daniel another envelope. This is a ticket to my show next month in Austin. Backstage pass, too. Bring someone special. Your girlfriend, your mom, whoever you'd like. Just come say hi if you're there. Daniel accepted the envelope, feeling that same overwhelming gratitude that had been hitting him in waves all week. Thank you, George, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Just keep being who you are, George said, climbing into his truck. That's payment enough. As Daniel watched George drive away, he realized that the past week had taught him something profound. Kindness wasn't weakness. Integrity wasn't foolishness. And sometimes, when you did the right thing, even when it cost you, the universe found a way to balance the scales. He walked back into the shop, ready to finish out his Saturday shift, feeling more at peace than he had in years. 3 weeks after Daniel started at Hill Country Motors, Richard Donovan stood in his nearly empty shop, staring at repair orders that weren't being filled, and phone messages from customers canceling their appointments. The boycott had evolved from social media outrage into real, sustained economic pressure. His weekly revenue had dropped by 60%. 2 of his 3 locations had become liabilities rather than assets, hemorrhaging money faster than he could plug the holes. Carlos Rodriguez had been hired by Robert Jensen after a strong recommendation from Daniel, joining the team at Hill Country Motors. Linda Torres had found a better-paying receptionist position at a medical clinic with better hours and actual respect from her boss. Of Richard's original staff, only 2 mechanics remained, Brandon Cooper and Wesley Grant, and both were actively job hunting. Richard sat in his office, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay, staring at the financial statements his accountant had delivered that morning. At this rate, he'd be bankrupt within 6 months. The business his father had spent 30 years building was collapsing around him, and Richard was finally being forced to confront the reality that he'd caused it himself. His phone rang. Another reporter, probably. He'd stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize after the 15th interview request. But this one showed a name on the caller ID, Walter Donovan Sr., his father, calling from the retirement community in San Marcos, where he'd moved 5 years ago. Richard's hand trembled as he answered. "Dad." "I saw the news," Walter said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I've been reading the articles, watching the coverage." "Richard, what the hell have you done to my business?" "Dad, it's not. The media is blowing this out of proportion. It's all because of that damned George Strait stirring up trouble." "George Strait didn't fire a good employee for doing his job," Walter said sharply. "You did that. George Strait didn't build a reputation for overcharging customers and mistreating workers. You did that. I've been hearing stories for years, Richard. Stories I didn't want to believe about my own son. But I can't ignore it anymore." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. His father's approval had always been elusive, always just out of reach. Walter had been a hard man to please, setting impossibly high standards. Richard had spent his whole life trying to prove he was worthy of inheriting the business, trying to show he could be even more successful than his father. "I've been trying to grow the business," Richard said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "To expand, to be profitable. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted you to take care of people," Walter said, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice cracked with emotion. "I built that business on relationships, on trust, on treating folks right. You turned it into a money machine with no soul. And now it's dying, Richard. You're killing it." After his father hung up, Richard sat in silence for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. Outside, he could hear the traffic on the street, the normal sounds of a world that was moving on without him. For the first time in years, maybe in his entire life, Richard Donovan allowed himself to really look at what he'd become. The angry, bitter man who screamed at employees. The businessman who saw customers as transactions rather than people. The son who'd taken his father's legacy and corrupted it beyond recognition. He pulled up George Strait's original social media post on his computer and read through the comments. Thousands of people condemning his actions, sharing their own stories of bad bosses and unfair treatment, celebrating Daniel Carter's good fortune. And scattered among them were comments about Donovan's auto repair specifically. Former customers detailing overcharges, unnecessary repairs, rude service. A public record of his failures. Richard opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an old photograph. It showed his father standing in front of the original shop in 1989, a young Richard beside him, both of them smiling. Richard remembered that day. He'd been 16, had just gotten his driver's license, and his father had let him drive a customer's car for the first time after a repair. The trust in that moment, the pride in his father's eyes. When had he lost his way? When had profit become more important than people? The answer, Richard realized with painful clarity, was gradual. 1,000 small choices, each one moving him further from his father's values. Charging a little extra here, cutting a corner there, treating employees as expendable resources. Each choice easier than the last, until he'd become someone he didn't recognize. Richard picked up his phone and made a call. Daniel was under a Honda Accord, replacing an exhaust system, when Robert appeared at the bay door. "Daniel, you've got a visitor. He's waiting in the office." Something in Robert's tone made Daniel pause. He rolled out from under the car, wiped his hands, and followed Robert to the office. Through the glass window, he could see Richard Donovan sitting in one of the visitor chairs, looking smaller somehow than Daniel remembered. "He just showed up about 10 minutes ago," Robert said quietly. "Asked if he could speak with you. I told him I'd ask if you were willing. You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. He'd moved on, built a new life, and he had no desire to revisit the worst night of his recent past. But something in the defeated slope of Richard's shoulders made him curious. "It's okay," Daniel said. "I'll talk to him." Daniel entered the office, and Richard stood up immediately, his movements awkward and uncertain. Up close, Daniel could see that the man had aged in 3 weeks. There were new lines around his eyes, gray hairs that hadn't been visible before, a weariness that went bone deep. "Daniel," Richard said, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know I don't deserve your time." "What do you want, Richard?" Richard took a deep breath. "I came to apologize for firing you, for humiliating you, for the way I treated you during the 3 years you worked for me. You were the best mechanic I had, and I never told you that. You cared about doing quality work, about treating customers fairly, and I punished you for it because it threatened my control." Daniel sat down slowly, genuinely surprised. This wasn't what he'd expected. "My business is failing," Richard continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm probably going to lose everything my father built. And you know what? I deserve it. Because I took something good and turned it into something ugly. I treated people like you, good, decent people, like they were worthless. And I did it because I was angry and bitter, and too proud to see what I was becoming." "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked. "Because you deserve to hear it. Because I need to say it." Richard's hands were shaking. "I've been thinking about the night I fired you. I remember the look on your face, the dignity you showed even when I was tearing into you. And I remember George Strait standing there, shocked that someone could be so cruel. That moment keeps replaying in my head. Me at my absolute worst, you at your absolute best." The contrast couldn't be clearer. Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd imagined this conversation dozens of times in his head. What he'd tell Richard if he ever got the chance. But now that it was happening, the anger he'd expected to feel was absent. Instead, he just felt sad for the broken man sitting across from him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard said. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to come back to work for me. I know you're better off here. I just needed you to know that I was wrong about everything, and that I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a moment. Through the office window, Daniel could see his co-workers working in their bays, the normal rhythm of a functioning, healthy workplace. This was what he'd always wanted, to be part of something good. "I accept your apology," Daniel finally said. "Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger doesn't serve me. You made my life hell for 3 years, Richard. But you also pushed me out of a situation that wasn't good for me and into one that is. I don't think you intended to do me a favor, but that's how it worked out." Richard nodded, wiping at his eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm trying to change. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm going to AA meetings. Turns out I've been using alcohol to cope with my anger for years. I'm trying to figure out how to be the person my father wanted me to be." "That's good," Daniel said genuinely. "I hope you succeed. Not for my sake, but for yours." After Richard left, Daniel stood in the office for a few minutes, processing what had happened. Robert knocked softly on the door frame. "You okay?" Robert asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "I think I am." He apologized. A real apology, not the corporate nonsense he gave to the press. "I wasn't expecting that." "Takes a lot for a man like him to do that," Robert observed. "Maybe there's hope for him yet." "Maybe," Daniel agreed. "But that's his journey, not mine." The rest of the week passed normally, with Daniel falling deeper into the comfortable routine of his new job. He'd started helping Miguel with training, teaching the younger mechanic the finer points of diagnostic work. He'd become friends with Tommy, grabbing beers after work on Thursdays. He'd found his place in the team, contributing his skills while learning from the experience of James and Frank. On Friday evening, as Daniel was cleaning up his bay before closing, his phone rang. George Strait. "Daniel, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all. Just finishing up for the day." "What's going on?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. I'm doing an interview tomorrow with Texas Monthly Magazine. They want to talk about what happened between us, the whole situation with Donovan's. They asked if they could include you in the article, maybe interview you as well. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with that before I agreed to anything." Daniel considered. The media attention had mostly died down over the past couple weeks, and he'd appreciated returning to relative anonymity. But George was asking, not demanding, respecting his autonomy. "What would they want to talk to me about?" Daniel asked. "Your experience, how things have worked out, what you've learned." They're positioning it as a story about integrity and consequences, about how social media can be used for good. Honestly, I think it could be a positive piece. But if you'd rather stay out of it, I completely understand. "No, I'll do it," Daniel decided. If it helps people understand that speaking up against unfairness matters, that's worth the discomfort. The interview took place the following Monday at a cafe in Fredericksburg. The journalist, Rebecca Palmer, was a thoughtful woman in her 40s who put Daniel at ease immediately. She asked insightful questions about his background, his values, what had motivated him to help George that rainy evening. "Did you ever imagine that one act of kindness would lead to all of this?" Rebecca asked. "Never," Daniel said honestly. "I was just doing what felt right in the moment. I didn't think about consequences or rewards. That's not why you do the right thing. But you've benefited significantly. New job, better pay, national recognition. Some people might say you got lucky." Daniel thought about that. "I did get lucky, but I also put myself in a position to be lucky by choosing integrity over convenience. If I'd refused to help George because my boss might get mad, none of this would have happened. So maybe luck favors people who make good choices, even hard ones." The article came out 3 weeks later with the title, "The Mechanic and the Legend: How One Act of Kindness Started a Movement." It featured interviews with Daniel, George, Robert Jensen, and even Carlos Rodriguez. It detailed Richard Donovan's fall and his attempts at redemption. It explored the broader themes of worker dignity, the power of social media for social good, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Daniel received letters from people across the country sharing their own stories of unfair treatment at work, thanking him for giving them courage to speak up. A community college in San Antonio asked him to speak to their automotive technology students about professional ethics. A local church invited him to share his story at their Sunday service. Daniel accepted the speaking invitation at the college, but declined most of the others. He wasn't comfortable being held up as some kind of hero or moral exemplar. He was just a mechanic who'd tried to help someone and gotten lucky with how things turned out. But he couldn't deny that something had shifted in him. The experience had taught him that his voice mattered, that standing up for his principles had value beyond just personal satisfaction. It had shown him that sometimes the right thing to do is also the brave thing, and that courage often comes with unexpected rewards. As autumn deepened into early winter, Daniel's life settled into a new normal. He worked at Hill Country Motors, saved money for his eventual dream of opening his own shop, spent time with friends and family. He stayed in occasional contact with George, who'd become something of a mentor, offering advice about business and life. And Richard Donovan? He sold 2 of his 3 shop locations, downsized the original Donovan's Auto Repair to a smaller operation, and slowly began rebuilding his reputation through genuine changed behavior. It would take years, maybe decades, to undo the damage he'd done. But he was trying, and that counted for something. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Daniel stood on the stage at the Moody Center in Austin, looking out at 18,000 people filling the arena. He was backstage at George Strait's concert, holding the VIP pass George had given him, feeling completely out of his element. He'd brought his mother, Patricia, whose eyes had filled with tears when he'd told her George had invited them. She'd raised her son to be kind and hardworking, never imagining those qualities would lead to moments like this. Now she stood beside him, dressed in her best outfit, clutching his arm like she was afraid she might wake up from a dream. "I can't believe this is real," Patricia whispered, as they watched George's band set up for the second half of the show. "My son, backstage at a George Strait concert." "Me neither, Mom," Daniel admitted. A member of George's crew approached them. "Mr. Carter? Mr. Strait would like to see you before he goes back on. Follow me, please." They were led to a private room where George sat with his wife, Norma Strait, reviewing the set list for the second half of the show. When George saw Daniel, his face lit up. "Daniel! Mrs. Carter!" He stood and shook their hands warmly. "I'm so glad you could make it. How are you enjoying the show?" "It's incredible," Daniel said. "I've listened to your music my whole life, but seeing it live like this, there's nothing like it." George introduced them to Norma, who was gracious and kind, asking Patricia about her nursing career and sharing stories about raising children while managing the demands of the music business. The conversation flowed naturally, and Daniel was struck again by how down-to-earth George remained, despite his fame. "I've been following your story," George said to Daniel. "Robert tells me you're doing excellent work at his shop. Says you're the best mechanic he's ever had." "Robert's generous with his praise," Daniel said, though he felt a flush of pride. "He's also honest. I've known Robert for 20 years. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean." George paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about starting a scholarship fund for automotive technology students. Kids who want to learn the trade but need financial help. I was hoping you might be willing to help me set it up. Maybe serve on the selection committee. You understand the industry and the kind of character we should be looking for in candidates." Daniel was momentarily speechless. "George, I'd be honored. Absolutely. Excellent. My people will be in touch with the details. I want to call it the Carter Strait Automotive Scholarship. Your name goes first." "You don't have to do that." "I want to," George said firmly. "You inspired this whole idea." Your story reminded me that there are young people out there trying to build honest careers, and they deserve support. This scholarship will help dozens of students over the years. That's your legacy, Daniel." A crew member knocked on the door. "Mr. Strait, 5 minutes to stage." George stood, straightening his iconic black cowboy hat. "I've got to get back out there. You two enjoy the rest of the show. And Daniel, thank you for everything." As George walked toward the stage, Daniel felt his mother squeeze his hand. "Your father would be so proud of you," Patricia said softly. "Wherever he is, I hope he knows what an amazing man his son turned out to be." Daniel hugged his mother close. His father had abandoned them, chosen his addictions and weaknesses over his family. For years, Daniel had carried anger about that, had wondered if something was wrong with him that his own father couldn't stay. But standing here now, having built a life based on the opposite of his father's choices, Daniel realized he'd already answered that question. He wasn't defined by his father's failures. He was defined by his own choices, his own integrity, his own willingness to do the right thing even when it was difficult. The concert's second half was spectacular. George performed all his classic hits, and when he launched into The Chair, Daniel sang along with 18,000 other people, feeling connected to something larger than himself. The music that had comforted him as a struggling teenager now soundtracked this moment of triumph and gratitude. After the concert, as Daniel and Patricia drove back to Fredericksburg, they talked about everything and nothing. About how proud Walter Donovan would be if he could see the scholarship bearing his grandson's name. About Amy's recent engagement to her longtime boyfriend, Nathan Willis. About normal family things that grounded Daniel in reality. When he dropped his mother off at her house in Kerrville, she cupped his face in her hands the way she had when he was a child. "I'm so proud of the man you've become," she said. "Not because George Strait knows your name or because there's going to be a scholarship fund, but because when it mattered most, you chose kindness over bitterness. You chose to help someone even though you knew it might cost you. That's who you are, Danny. That's who you've always been." Daniel drove home with his mother's words echoing in his head. He thought about the journey of the past 6 months, from that rainy evening in September to this incredible night in March. He thought about Richard Donovan's breakdown and attempted redemption. He thought about the new friends he'd made at Hill Country Motors, the sense of purpose he'd found in his work. But most of all, he thought about the simple choice he'd made to stay late and fix a stranger's truck. One decision, made without hesitation, that had rippled outward in ways he never could have predicted. A year after the incident, Daniel stood in front of a small building on the outskirts of Fredericksburg, looking up at the sign being installed above the entrance. Carter's Automotive and Repair. He'd saved aggressively, lived frugally, and with a loan from a local credit union and a generous silent investment from someone who'd insisted on remaining anonymous, though Daniel strongly suspected George's involvement, he'd scraped together enough to lease and equip his own shop. It was small, just 3 bays and a modest waiting area, but it was his. Robert Jensen had been nothing but supportive, even offering advice on suppliers and business practices. "I'm not worried about competition," Robert had said. "There's enough business for shops that treat people right. Besides, I'm getting close to retirement age. I like knowing there'll be someone like you carrying on the tradition of honest work." Kevin Hayes was leaving his current shop to join Daniel as a partner mechanic, bringing his expertise and friendship. They'd also hired Jennifer Walsh, a recent technical school graduate who'd applied for the George Strait scholarship, and impressed Daniel with her knowledge and work ethic. Even though she hadn't won the scholarship, she'd been a finalist. Daniel had offered her a job on the spot. The shop's grand opening was scheduled for the following Saturday. Daniel had placed ads in local papers, posted on social media, and spread the word through his network. He had no idea if anyone would show up, if his reputation would translate into actual business, if this dream he'd been building toward his entire adult life would succeed or fail. Friday evening, the day before the opening, Daniel was organizing tools in the shop when he heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through the window, he saw George Strait's Silverado. George climbed out, walked to the entrance, and admired the new sign. Carter's Automotive and Repair. Has a nice ring to it. George, Daniel said, stepping outside. What are you doing here? Came to see the place. I've got some pull with the owner. Thought he might give me a private tour before the grand opening crowds arrive. Daniel laughed and led George inside, showing him the bays, the equipment, the waiting area he'd set up with comfortable chairs, free coffee, and a bookshelf stocked with magazines and local information. This is great, Daniel, George said genuinely. You've built something solid here. Your principles made real. I couldn't have done it without you, Daniel said. The publicity, the connections, the investment? George interrupted with a smile. I told you I wanted to be anonymous. I knew it was you. Well, consider it paid forward. You helped me when I needed it. Now I'm helping you. That's how community works. George walked to the waiting area and examined the bookshelf. He pulled out a business book and flipped through it. I want to give you some advice, if you're willing to hear it. Always. Don't let success change who you are. You're going to face pressures to cut corners, to prioritize profit over people, to become the kind of businessman you despise. Resist that with everything you've got. The moment you start treating customers as transactions or employees as resources, you've lost what makes this place special. I won't forget, Daniel promised. What happened with Richard Donovan taught me what not to become. This shop will be built on integrity, or it won't be built at all. George nodded approvingly. Good man. Now, I've got something for you. He walked back to his truck and returned with a framed gold record. This is from my album Troubadour, the one you said got you through high school. I had it inscribed for you. Daniel took the frame, reading the engraved plate. To Daniel Carter, may your journey be filled with the same integrity and courage you showed me. Your friend, George Strait. I don't know what to say, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Say you'll hang it somewhere in your shop, George replied. Let it remind you and your customers that character matters. The gold record was hung prominently in the waiting area, and it became one of the most photographed features of Carter's Automotive and Repair. The grand opening exceeded Daniel's wildest expectations. Over 200 people showed up throughout the day. Former customers from his time at Donovan's, people from the community who'd followed his story, mechanics from other shops showing professional courtesy, and countless George Strait fans who wanted to support the mechanic from that story. Robert Jensen came by to offer congratulations and brought his entire crew from Hill Country Motors. Carlos Rodriguez showed up with his family. Even Linda Torres stopped by with her son, who was doing better managing his diabetes thanks to her new job's excellent insurance. And late in the afternoon, a familiar figure walked through the door. Richard Donovan. He looked healthier than the last time Daniel had seen him. Clear-eyed, better groomed, carrying himself with something approaching humility. He waited patiently until Daniel had finished with a customer, then approached. I heard about your opening, Richard said quietly. I wanted to stop by and wish you success. You deserve it. Thank you, Richard. How are things with you? Better. Slower, but better. I've got a small crew now, just 4 of us. We're focused on quality over quantity, on building relationships instead of just processing repairs. It's not what my business used to be, but it's healthier. I'm healthier. I'm glad to hear it. Richard looked around the shop, taking in the clean space, the organized tools, the friendly atmosphere. This is what my father's shop used to feel like before I screwed it up. You're doing it right, Daniel. Don't ever lose that. After Richard left, Kevin came up beside Daniel. Did I just see what I think I saw? Donovan actually congratulating you? People can change, Daniel said. Not everyone does, but some do. I think he's genuinely trying. Well, regardless, this day is about you and what you've built. You did it, man. You actually did it. As the sun set on that March evening and the last customers departed, Daniel, Kevin, and Jennifer sat in the waiting area, exhausted but exhilarated, reviewing the day's appointments and setting up the schedule for the following week. They had more work booked than Daniel had dared to hope for. His phone buzzed with a text from George. Heard the opening was a huge success. Proud of you. Coffee next week? Daniel typed back, absolutely. Thank you for everything. He looked around his shop, still hard to believe, and thought about the winding path that had led here. A rainy evening, a broken-down truck, a moment of simple kindness, all the fear and uncertainty that followed, the unexpected friendship with a music legend, the painful lessons about injustice and redemption, the slow, steady building toward this moment. Life didn't always reward doing the right thing. Daniel knew that. Sometimes good people suffered and bad people prospered. Sometimes the universe was indifferent to human concepts of fairness. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the arc of events bent toward justice. Sometimes kindness was returned tenfold. Sometimes standing up for your principles opened doors you never knew existed. Daniel had gotten lucky. He knew that, acknowledged it, remained grateful for it. But he'd also put himself in position to be lucky, through years of consistent choices, to value integrity over expedience, people over profit, character over convenience. As he locked up his shop that night, setting the alarm and walking to his truck in the parking lot, Daniel felt a deep sense of contentment. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead. Difficult customers, cash flow problems, equipment failures, all the struggles that came with running a small business. But he would face them with the same principles that had guided him this far. He drove home through the dark streets of Fredericksburg, past Donovan's auto repair where it had all started, past Hill Country Motors, where Robert had given him a second chance, through the town that had embraced his story and supported his dream. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments where he'd have to choose between easy and right. But tonight, Daniel Carter allowed himself to simply appreciate how far he'd come, how much he'd learned, and how a single act of kindness on a rainy Thursday evening had changed the entire trajectory of his life. Some people never get to see the results of their good deeds. They do the right thing and receive nothing but hardship in return. Daniel had been blessed with the opposite experience, a tangible reminder that character matters, that integrity has value, that treating people with dignity and respect isn't just morally correct, but practically wise. As he pulled into his apartment complex, Daniel noticed the sky clearing, stars becoming visible through breaks in the clouds. Somewhere in Texas, George Strait was probably at home with his family. Richard Donovan was probably reflecting on his own journey toward redemption. Kevin was tucking his kids into bed. His mother was reading before sleep. Amy was planning her wedding with Nathan. And Daniel Carter, mechanic and business owner, was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, living proof that sometimes the good guys really do win in the end.